Hey, how are you today? This is Josh Patrick, and you're at the 50/50 Accelerator Podcast. 50/50 stands for 50% more profit, 50% less time working, and that's what we focus on here. Our guest today is Burke Franklin. Burke has an interesting company. It started off with he had 30 employees, and now he's down to almost none. And that's what we're going to talk with him about today, how he managed to do that. And still keep his business running the way it did with 30 people. You know, the world is different today than it was, oh God, I don't know, even 5 years ago. And the way we do business is definitely different today than we did then. So we'll bring Burke in and we'll learn a little bit about his story and find out how he did that magic trick. So let's bring Burke on. Hey, Burke, how are you today?
Hey, Josh. Good morning. Good.
Thanks for
Interesting
joining me.
question.
Excuse me?
It's an interesting question you ask.
How you did. Well, let's start there. I mean, you had 30 employees. How many years ago?
Actually, it was about 25 years ago. We were big in software retail in the 90s. And so we had a sales team, we had tech support, we had engineering, we had, shipping, all that kind of stuff in-house. And I was in an office building in Silicon Valley in Los Altos there. And it was booming, that way. Of course, going on to the internet and everything went online, then no one really needed to be in the office. I mean, spending a fortune on office rent. It's nice having people around where you could walk into their office and go, hey, but then I was probably the most annoying person in the company because I would walk into everybody's office and go, hey, how about this idea? They said, yeah, Burke, you gave me an idea yesterday. What am I supposed to do with that one now that you came in and dumped a new one on me today? So.
I have the same problem. And I actually have a solution for it. And the solution is what I call the 2-week rule, where, if you go back in the 80s, you were at a program or a seminar, and they had payphones back then because there was no cell phones. So during the break, I was that guy. I was on the payphone calling my office saying, we need to change this. And I did this so often that people just plain ignored me. So I finally said, this doesn't work very well. So I put in what I call the 2-week rule. So when I have a new idea, I can't do anything with it for 2 weeks. And if after 2 weeks, it still sounds like a good idea, which it almost never does, then I can start talking to people about it.
Well, you go to these seminars. I was a member of tech, the executive committee, which is now Vistage.
Yeah.
And, it was brilliant stuff because once a month we'd have this meeting with all these CEOs and there'd be this consultant that would come in. And one time we had the assistant director to the CIA come sitting in the same room with us. And, he gave us this whole lecture on forward looking and how to be proactive in your business and got all excited. And but the problem was he had 2 hours to explain to us and give us all the background, plus his own gravitas from having actually worked at the CIA, telling us all this stuff. And then I'm supposed to go back to my office and say, okay, guys, here's what we got to do. And I have all of maybe 20 minutes to explain, even though it's my company, you still need to get buy-in from your people. And it was practically impossible to translate this excitement and priority and need and emergency to the people. And they're just like, oh, get out of here. And the tragedy was just not being able to implement this stuff because you just couldn't.
Yeah, that's true. So I want to go back to my original question. So you had 30 people working with you. Are you still selling the same software product today that you did? I mean, I'm sure it's a different product today than 30 years ago, but
yeah,
are you still selling a software product?
It is. I mean, you would call it software as a service, SaaS, as they say. And so we transformed all of our Windows apps into basically web-based apps. But now they all work together. They work the same. They can share the company information. So we try to reduce the amount of typing as much as possible as well. So you can start with a business plan, go to the marketing plan, create an employee handbook or a safety plan. And all these things are templatized because most business owners don't think of this stuff until it's too late. But we make it really easy to do. But they all fundamentally work the same way. And Macs and PCs can collaborate. It just, the web enabled a lot more functionality to make everything simpler.
So how did you decide? I mean, right now you're basically working with yourself with a bunch of contractors, correct?
Yes.
So how did you make this work? I mean, do your customers now come to you just through the web and there's no sales process except your funnel you use online? And how did you decide to drop your salespeople and do this instead to create business?
Well, it wasn't really like I dropped them. I dropped you. The different normal attrition and different things happened along the way. But when it came time to replace people or do things differently, the internet really enabled a lot of that replacement. And then people could work on it. I call it asynchronously because they could work on it here and then it would show up online and then that would take over. And everybody goes online looking for information and answers anyway. Why not have that already there? And I can go to different people of different expertise. And maybe it's an hour here, an hour there, or a week here and a week there to get stuff done. And it's just a matter of staying on top of it. And it's just altogether easier.
So I'm going to ask you a question. You can say it's none of my business, but just out of curiosity, are you making more money today than you did when you had 30 people?
It's about no, not really. To tell you the truth, I mean, the world's changed. We've got a ton of competition these days, so that's narrowed it down a bit. I mean, back in the day, we had 10 different products in 3,500 stores. So you had a nice retail box. People would walk in the store, they'd pick up the box and buy it, and we get orders from a distributor for, give us, 5,000 copies of Biz Plan Builder and 3,000 copies of the Employee Manual Builder, that kind of thing. And today it's different. It's just people buy it one at a time from us. So, but there are subscriptions now, so that it's more of a predictable cash flow. So that's improved.
Let's talk about that for a minute because it's such a big deal that most businesses, at least in my experience, really don't think about, which is recurring revenue.
Yeah.
And in my experience, recurring revenue is one of the most important things to make a business sustainable. So how did you just go with the industry with SaaS? SaaS stands for software as a service, by the way.
Yeah.
And and that's all run on a subscription basis. You don't buy it and own it. Although there are some people give you lifetime subscriptions, which
we do that too. Yeah.
Which I think is sort of silly, but that's because the net present value of an ongoing subscription is pretty good.
It is, but occasionally for cash flow purposes, someone's going to pay you the lifetime fee. As long as you set that up, that's going to be your lifetime value of that customer right there, and it's done. But it's good for cash from time to time.
Okay.
I wouldn't say, look, I'm following the industry. I don't feel like I followed the industry. I just followed a certain practicality of how it could work, and I saw how we could use that and do it. I don't know if it was before the industry or whatever, but it just was. It just seemed obvious to me. And having it all online made it easier for us to develop the product because we could update products on the fly. We could update policies and procedures on the fly. We could go to those meetings like you're talking about. Instead of waiting 2 weeks, we could implement it right away into the plan, and it was easier. It's just easier to do altogether. And we started out with, it was a straight up template, just a Word document, an Excel file shipped on a disk. And then it went to, we needed a Windows app when Windows 95 came out. So we made a Windows app. And then, we needed a Mac app. And of course, Apple took off. And then we needed a Mac app. And you can't just convert a Windows app into a Mac app. It's not like that, not that simple. It's a whole different thing. And so why not just make it work online? And that way it works for Macs and PCs. And now they could collaborate because we had a lot of different people in different places. I work on a PC. I'll never use a Mac, and the Mac people hate PCs, and it's oil and water there. And so, but now we can make them. Now I can be agnostic. It doesn't matter. I wanted the answers to all questions to be yes, it can do that. So that's really what it enabled. Then the word software as a service became a thing.
So, would you say? And I know it's going to be a hard question. What would you say is the biggest mistake you ever made, and what did you learn from it?
God, I think of that as a job interview question. I think there's probably about 3 or 4 mistakes I would add. In fact, I even wrote a book called Business Black Belt where I articulate a lot of things that were successful, and I also talk about some of the failures. But I would say, one thing was Well, I had a person whose job it was to oversee the development of the app, the original Windows app we had. And it was one of those times when people were saying, all the gurus and the workshops I'd go to, like you'd mentioned, you'd go learn something. And what I should have waited 2 weeks on was, hey, Burke, you've got to let go. Let your people do it. Let them have their wings. Trust them to get the job done. Well, we ended up with a catastrophic flaw because not only did I delegated it, but I abdicated. So even though I borrowed the $800,000 and put my house on the line for this, I should have said, look, I just borrowed $800,000 and put my own, guaranteed it was my house. I'm going to be looking over your shoulder every minute on this project because I want to be sure it goes well. It'd be like an architect building a house or designing a house and not going out and seeing the contractor, every other day or once a week or how often they need to do it to make sure the house is looking the way they designed it. And the contractor didn't go off and do something different and forget a key ingredient that would make the house special. Anyway, that would be one of the disasters. And you've really got to, as one person put it, one of my own people said, Burke, you got to inspect what you expect. You've got to trust but verify. There's probably a dozen more of those statements like that, but you have to do all that stuff. You just can't let it go. You have to really stay with it. So, and the other answer to that question is I hired a guy to have this new product. I wanted the poster child sales manager, sales VP. And I asked him that question. So tell me, what have you learned, or what mistakes have you made that you've learned from? He goes, oh, I don't make mistakes. I'm thinking, all right. So what was my mistake? I hired the guy.
Yeah, that was a big mistake there.
So if they dodge that question, that's a red flag or red light on the dashboard, and you cannot ignore it.
No question about it. And the chances of that guy being a brilliant jerk are very high.
I bet a lot of money on that and lost. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. So the thing that you brought up the first time around, and there's a couple of things there which I found really interesting, is that the biggest mistake most business owners make, and it's why they stop growing their business, is they make a delegation mistake and they say, I can't do that again. It costs me too much money. And the truth is, learning how to delegation is a process. It's not something you just do the first day. And you hit two of the three things that we talk about with delegation. One is inspect, the other, or set up an expectation. Then you inspect to make sure the expectation is done right. Then you accept the work. Except, this is what I learned, so I've added this along the way, is that when I inspect, it's never done right the first time I inspect. So then we go to adapt, where it's inspect and adapt, and then finally accept when you get it right. And after you get it right, then we ask the person to systematize it and document it, so somebody else can learn it. But it's really, delegation is, in my opinion, is the hardest thing for a business owner to learn. And it's the one that most of us have made some very expensive mistakes on.
Well, how does the saying go? If you want it done right, do it yourself. And
that's terrible. I hate that saying. God, I hate that saying.
Well, I didn't say it so you'd like me, but it's just, but that's one of those things. And so that it flies in the face of delegation. But, it's like I go to the dentist and I say, this one right here, fix that one. And, I don't tell him, okay, use that tool over there. And I want you to do this with that thing over there. And what about this? And of course, lately you'd say, I saw on the internet, you should do it this way. You go to the dentist and you tell him what the problem is, and you make sure you point to the tooth that hurts and just sit back and enjoy the Novocaine, and hopefully it's always turned out for me, so I don't worry about that. But yeah, you don't really micromanage at that point, because the other thing I discovered is that oftentimes, you tell people what the objective is. They need to know the objective, and you'll read about Navy SEALs and all these other operators and do things. They got the objective. Now, how they're going to get there from here is another story. You may have an idea of how they're going to get there from here, but they may see another way of doing it that's better. But as long as it achieves the objective, then maybe there's certain parameters. You got to do it this way, but you can't do that. You can't do this. It's got to do this thing here. So as long as they, keep it within the guidelines and maybe do it a little differently, that's fine, as long as the outcome is what you want. But that requires constant, diligent vigilance, looking over their shoulder, and just, hey,
It can be as simple as a 5-minute check-in every other day or once a week. Or if you go more than once a week when you're first starting to delegate, you're almost guaranteed to have a problem.
Yeah. Well, the problem was, so I let this thing go for several months,
Yeah.
and then I called. Burke, you got to come to Boston to meet with the developers. We use an outside programming house, so I flew to Boston on a red eye. That's another mistake you make. Don't fly to an important meeting on a red eye where you're there the next day and you haven't slept all night. Then you're just. I was sitting in the conference room. They said, Burke, here's the problem, and I'm thinking, I'm like dead asleep, thinking, oh God, how am I going to figure this out? And today the answer would have been obvious, but we couldn't come up with an answer at the time. We just had to go with the ship the product with the flaw in it. And of course we got a lot of them back, and that was sucked. And I had to go back and have somebody else reprogram it and fix it.
So I'm curious, Burke, how did you get into this business?
Well, it's kind of a long story. I mean, back as a kid, I read Popular Mechanics and Popular Science, and you read about all these inventors and inventions and how cool they were. And somewhere along the way, I thought, my grandfather said to me, if you're going to make any money, I can almost say it here in his voice, you gotta start your own business. You're never going to make any money working for somebody else. Although I'm sure there's a lot of people who have made a lot of money. Look at Microsoft millionaires. They made money working for somebody else. But nevertheless, that was the idea I went with as a child. And I thought, okay, so I got to invent something. What can I invent? And I'd be reading Popular Science and Popular Mechanics, and they had all these great inventions. And I've often wondered, where these inventions go? How come now we're finally getting to flying cars, which is another subject. But what impressed me, the one that really stuck in my mind was some guy had invented the 200 mile per gallon carburetor. And I thought, okay, where is it? What happened to that guy? Conspiracy theories notwithstanding, whatever happened to the 200 mile per gallon carburetor? And why aren't we getting 200 miles per gallon today? So it's always been one of my curiosities, pet peeves. How does somebody who invents the cool invention build a successful company around it? And more often than not, it's the mediocre invention that wins the day, but the guy with the cool invention, the better version of it, somehow loses because they spend more time on the product than on the marketing, which is a different category of mistake. But nevertheless, I was always curious, how do we get the 200 mile per gallon to prevail, and why aren't we getting 200 miles per gallon today? And anyway, long story short, or short story longer, I was in Silicon Valley. I was there about 20 years, and a friend of mine called up and said, Burke, I need a business plan for Apple. They want to buy my engineering software. But of course, at the time, the SBA, the Small Business Administration, had done a study of 26,000 businesses that failed and found that 65 some odd percent of them had no business plan. So they wanted to see his business plan because they needed to make sure his company would survive and thrive and continue to develop and support his product. And so I got a degree in business from the University of California in Santa Barbara with some electrical engineering background. So I got a job at Texas Instruments. So I knew something about the technology, selling electronic components for a few years. And then I got the job at the Sharper Image catalog as the electronics buyer when they later promoted me to the catalog department. So I had an experience of direct response marketing, catalog marketing, and all that. And then from that, I discovered a word processor in Silicon Valley that I was selling to enterprises. So between the technology, the direct response marketing and catalog, and the high-tech company enterprise, I put together this business plan. Of course, I had to read up on business plans as well, but I thought of it as a catalog of everything Apple management needed to know about my friend's business so they could make a good decision. And so we got the deal. And over the next year, I was helping people. Well, I thought, wow, maybe I could help people with this business plan. And so I was helping people with their ideas, the same kind of pet peeve I had, how do you get these businesses funded into business? I helped them raise venture capital. And about a year into this, I'm standing in the shower thinking, if I see the crappy business plan, I'm going to scream. Why don't I just take all this content I've created for these people and turn it into a template that people could write their own business plan themselves? And that's where it became Biz Plan Builder. And it's been, wildly successful for companies ever since. And I've sold a couple million copies of it since then. But that's really the story of that.
So would you call yourself, you're sort of it appears to me on one level, you're an accidental entrepreneur and became a seasoned business owner. And And on the other hand, you actually mindfully decided you were going to be a business owner, and you didn't really consciously go out and look for something, but you took all the stuff you learned and you integrated it into an idea that actually has some real legs to it.
I always knew I would have my own business at some point, or I always thought I would, but I didn't really consciously think, okay, I'm working at Texas Instruments. How am I going to learn from these guys and then take it into a business in the future? And then go get the job at the Sharper Image, thinking, okay, here's a logical pre-planned step along the way. I didn't do that. I just took one thing after another, and finally it was just there I was on my own in Silicon Valley, thinking, because the word processors went the way of the dinosaurs when Macs and PCs came out, and there I was thinking, what am I going to do? And I would even advocate for students these days, get out of school, go work for some companies just to get a sense of how it works, get a sense of what the problems are. If you're going to solve a problem, you really want to solve a problem that you've had or that you've seen firsthand, so you really have a solid understanding of what the problem really is. Look at the Airbnb guys. They needed a place to stay, and they were struggling with that. And I thought, wait a minute, we can't be the only ones in the world with this problem. So it's like that, like with the business plan. I just thought someday I'm going to need a business plan because I'm going to have a great idea. Why don't I just make a template for these other guys? And then in the meantime, I realized, whoa, the aha moment was, this is my product. This is the thing. And if I can help people with 200 mile per gallons, gallon carburetors get into business, more power to them.
That's great. I have what you just were talking about, I think actually is, if not as applicable, maybe even more applicable, which is rising generations when they're growing up and they're starting to work in their parents' business and they actually want to take the business over, which seems to be happening less and less these days. But I think part of the problem is that the elder generation does a lousy job of preparing the younger generation to be in business. And one of the things that I always want to see people do is have the younger generation work outside the family business for at least 5 years.
Right.
Because they come in, I mean, if you go in and you join the family business, you're not seeing anything out there except for what you've grown up knowing.
Yeah.
That was part of my problem.
Even if you worked for a competitor to the family business.
Yeah, well, that's, often what you'll see competitors or people in the same industry who don't compete directly with each other.
Yeah.
And they'll swap kids. You see that in the car dealership world. You see that all the time. They have these things they call the 20 groups, which are 20 dealerships that get together and have regular meetings. And you'll see the 20 groups will swap kids. It happens quite a bit, actually.
Interesting. I haven't seen that before. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really one of those kind of cool things.
The other thing I found the use for the business plan, I mean, most people say on the business plan, well, I'm not a startup, I don't need a business plan. Wait a minute.
Well, that's so false. My God.
Well, yeah. Well, I look at strategic planning. I see all these products this at the end of the year for sale. Strategic planning, basically it boils down to triple sales by Q1 or Q2 and just keep doing more and more of the same with new goals. And they don't look at, look, this year we had a whole new political landscape shift. And I would advocate that you look at the problem you solve, who's got it. I mean, revisit all your basics of your business, and then get your good ideas in place for here's how we can improve this, not just double down on more of the same, which I think a lot of strategic planning really is. And then back to your question about the kids, at the other end of the spectrum, the business plan helps sell the business, because business brokers will tell you that most businesses are unsellable. And a lot of brokers will tell you that many of them are just train wrecks behind the scenes.
Yeah.
If they had a plan in place, which turns into that prospectus to sell it, or it's the operating manual for the kids to use so they understand what dad was thinking when he solved the original problem and how he went about it, so they can take over the business and run with it because they got an owner's manual.
Yeah, unfortunately, Burke, we are out of time. And I just want to point out one more thing, because we don't have time to talk about this, but it's a really big deal, which is knowing the problem that you solve in your business. I don't know about you, but I've talked to hundreds of businesses over the years. Less than 5% can ever answer that question correctly. They tell me what they do. They don't tell me what the problems they solve.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there. And thank you so much. This has been really a lot of fun. And I hope you folks get some really good information out of it, because I did.
That's
So
good.
this is Josh Patrick. And before I stop, Burke, how can people find you? I almost forgot.
Well, you can find me at businesspowertools.com. It's spelled as it sounds, businesspowertools.com, and you can learn about us there. And happy to give you a demo of the new platform.
Cool. And I would like you, if you like this podcast, I'd like you to go to wherever you're listening to it and give us an honest rating review. If you love us, give us 5 stars. If you don't, give me 1 star. I'll cry a little bit, but maybe I'll get over it someday. And thanks a lot for spending some time with us today. My name is Josh Patrick. We're at the 50/50 Accelerator podcast. Thanks a lot for stopping by. I hope to see you back here really soon.
Thank you, Josh. Good meeting you. Good for talking with you.